the early hours of the 13th of March 1964, Kitty Genovese, a 28-year-old bartender, was raped and stabbed to death outside the apartment building where she lived in the Kew Gardens neighborhood of the Queensborough of New York City. 2 weeks after the murder, the New York Times published an article claiming that 37 witnesses saw or heard the attack and none of them called the police or came to her aid. However, subsequent investigations revealed that the extent of public apathy was exaggerated. While some neighbours heard her cries, many didn't realise the severity of the situation. This incident prompted inquiries into what became known as the bystander effect, or Genovese syndrome, and the murder became a staple of US psychology textbooks for the next 4 decades. Researchers have since uncovered major inaccuracies in the Times article, and police interviews revealed that some witnesses had attempted to contact authorities. In 1964, reporters at a competing news organisation discovered that the Times article was inconsistent with the facts, but they were unwilling at the time to challenge the Times editor Abe Rosenthal. In 2007, an article in the American Psychologist found no evidence for the presence of 38 witnesses, or that witnesses observed the murder, or that witnesses remained inactive. In 2016, the Times called its own reporting flawed, stating that the original story grossly exaggerated the number of witnesses and what they had perceived. Winston Moseley, a 29-year-old Manhattan native, was arrested during a house burglary 6 days after the murder. While in custody, he confessed to killing Genovese. At his trial, he was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. His sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment. He died in prison on the 28th of March 2016 at the age of 81, having served 52 years. Catherine Susan Kitty Genovese was born in the Brooklyn borough of New York on the 7th of July 1935, the eldest of 5 children of Italian-American parents Rachel and Vincent Andrinelle Genovese. She was raised Catholic, living in a brownstone residence at 29 St. John's Place in Park Slope, a western Brooklyn neighborhood populated mainly by families of Italian and Irish heritage. In her teenage years, she attended an all-girls Prospect Heights High School, where she was recalled as being self-assured beyond her years and having a sunny disposition. In 1954, after her mother witnessed a murder, her family moved to New Canaan, Connecticut, while Genovese, who had recently graduated from high school, remained in Brooklyn with her grandparents to prepare for her upcoming marriage. Later that year, the couple wed, but the marriage was annulled near the end of 1954 due to Genovese being a lesbian. After moving into an apartment in Brooklyn, she worked in clerical jobs, which she found unappealing. By the late 1950s, she had accepted a position as a bartender. In August 1961, she was briefly arrested for bookmarking, as she had been taking bets on horse races from her bar patrons. She and her friend, Dee Guarnieri, were fined $50 each, equivalent to $526 in 2024, and she lost her job. Genovese then obtained another bartender position in Ev's 11th Hour Bar on Jamaica Avenue and 193rd Street in Hollis, Queens, and she was soon managing the bar on behalf of its absentee owner. By working double shifts, she was able to save money, which she intended to use to open an Italian restaurant. She shared her Kew Gardens apartment at 82 to 78 Austin Street with Mary Ann Zielenko, her girlfriend since 1963. Zielenko died in 2024 at the age of 85. At approximately 2:30 a.m. on the 13th of March 1964, Genovese left Ev's 11th Hour Bar and began driving home in a red Fiat. Whilst waiting for a traffic light to change at Hoover Avenue, she was spotted by Winston Moseley, who was sitting in his parked Chevrolet Corvair. Genovese arrived home at 3:15 a.m. and parked a car in Kew Gardens Long Island Railroad parking station lot, about 100 feet from her door, to her apartment in an alleyway near the rear of the building. As she walked towards the building, Moseley, who had followed her home, exited his vehicle, which he had parked at a corner bus stop on Austin Street. Armed with a hunting knife, he approached Genovese. She ran towards the front of the building, and Moseley ran after her, overtook her and stabbed her twice in the back. Genovese screamed. Several neighbours heard her cry, but only few of them recognised the sound as a cry for help. When Robert Moser, one of the neighbours, shouted at the attacker, Moseley ran away, and Genovese slowly made her way towards the rear of the building, seriously injured and out of view of any witnesses. Witnesses saw Moseley enter his car, drive away, and return 10 minutes later. Shadowing his face with a wide-brimmed hat, he systematically searched the parking lot, the train station, and the apartment complex, eventually finding Genovese, who was barely conscious, and lying in the hallway at the back of the building, where a locked door had prevented her from going inside. Out of view of the street and those who had heard her or seen any sign of the initial attack, Mosley stabbed Genovese several more times before raping her, stealing $49 from her and running away again. The attack spanned approximately half an hour. The knife wounds in Genovese's hands suggested that she attempted to defend herself. Her neighbour and close friend, Sophia Farrar, found Genovese shortly after the second attack and held her in her arms, whispering, "Help is on the way," until an ambulance arrived. Records of the earliest calls to police are unclear, but the calls weren't given a high priority. The incident occurred 4 years before New York City implemented the 911 emergency call system. One witness said his father called the police after the first attack and reported a woman was beat up, got up, and was staggering around. A few minutes after the second attack, another witness, Carl Ross, called friends for advice on what to do before calling the police. Genovese was picked up by an ambulance at 4:15 a.m. and died en route to the hospital. She was buried on the 16th of March 1964 in Lakeview Cemetery in New Canaan, Connecticut. Zielenko, Genovese's girlfriend, was questioned by Detective Mitchell Sang at 7 a.m. on the morning after the murder. She was later interrogated for 6 hours by two homicide detectives, John Carroll and Jerry Burns, whose questioning centered on her relationship with Genovese. This was also the police's focus when they questioned the couple's neighbours. Initially, Zielenko was considered to be a suspect. On the 19th of March 1964, 6 days after the stabbing, Mosley was arrested for a suspected robbery in Ozone Park after a television set was recovered in the trunk of his car. The car was searched after a local man, Royal Cleary, became suspicious when he saw Mosley removing the television from a neighbour's house. Cleary questioned Mosley, who claimed to be a removal worker. However, after consulting another neighbour, Jack Brown, who confirmed that the homeowners weren't moving, Cleary called the police. Brown disabled Mosley's car to ensure that he couldn't flee before police arrived. A detective recalled a white car similar to Mosley's had been reported by some of the witnesses to Genovese's murder, and informed detectives Carroll and Sang. During questioning, Mosley admitted to the murders of Genovese and two other women, Anna Marie Johnson, who had been shot and burned to death in her apartment in South Ozone Park a few weeks earlier, and 15-year-old Barbara Kralik, who had been killed in her parents' Springfield Greens home in the previous July. Winston Mosley was 29 at the time he murdered Genovese. He was from Ozone Park, Queens, and worked at Remington Rand as a tab operator, preparing the punch cards used at the time mainly for data input or digital computers. Mosley was married with 3 children and didn't have a criminal record. While in custody, Mosley confessed to killing Genovese. He detailed the attack, corroborating the physical evidence at the scene. He said that his motive for the attack was simply to kill a woman, saying that he preferred to kill women because they were easier and didn't fight back. Mosley stated that he got up that night at around 2 a.m. while his wife was working nights as a registered nurse and drove through Queens to find a victim. Mosley saw Genovese on her way home and followed her to the parking lot before killing her. He also confessed to murdering and sexually assaulting 2 other women and to committing between 30 and 40 burglaries. Subsequent psychiatric examinations suggested that Mosley was a necrophile. Mosley was charged with the murder of Genovese, but wasn't charged with the other 2 murders he had admitted to. For the police, a complicating factor was that another man, Alvin Mitchell, had also confessed to the murder of Barbara Kralik. Mosley's trial began on the 8th of June 1964 and was presided over by Judge J. Erwin Shapiro. Mosley initially pleaded not guilty, but his attorney later changed his plea to not guilty by reason of insanity. During his testimony, Mosley described the events of the night he murdered Genovese along with the 2 other murders to which he'd confessed and numerous other burglaries and rapes. The jury deliberated for 7 hours before returning a guilty verdict at around 10:30 p.m. on the 11th of June. On the 15th of June, Mosley was sentenced to death for the murder of Genovese. When the jury foreman read the sentence, Mosley showed no emotion, while some spectators applauded and cheered. Shapiro added, "I don't believe in capital punishment, but when I see a monster like this, I wouldn't hesitate to pull the switch myself." On the 23rd of June, Mosley appeared as a defence witness in the trial of Alvin Mitchell for the murder of Barbara Kralik. After being granted immunity from prosecution, he testified that he had killed Kralik. The trial produced a hung jury, but Mitchell was convicted in a second trial. On the 1st of June 1967, the New York Court of Appeals found that Mosley should have been able to argue that he was medically insane at the sentencing hearing when the trial court found that he had been legally sane, and the sentence was reduced to life imprisonment. On the 18th of March 1986, Mosley escaped whilst being transported back to prison from Mayer Memorial Hospital in Buffalo, where he'd undergone minor surgery for a self-inflicted injury. He'd hit the transporting correctional officer, stole his weapon, and fled to a nearby vacant house owned by a Grand Island couple, Mr. and Mrs. Matthew Kaluga, where he'd stayed undetected for 3 days. On the 21st of March, the Kalugas went back to check on the house, where they encountered Mosley, who held them hostage for more than an hour, binding and gagging Mr. Kaluga and raping Mrs. Kaluga. He then took the couple's car and fled. He travelled to Grand Island, where, on the 22nd of March, he broke into another house and held a woman and her daughter hostage for 2 hours before releasing them unharmed. He surrendered to police shortly afterwards and was charged with escape and kidnapping, to which he pleaded guilty. He was given 2 additional 15-year sentences to run concurrently with his life sentence. In September 1971, he participated in the Attica prison riot. Later in the same decade, he obtained a Bachelor in Arts in Sociology in prison from Niagara University. He became liable for parole in 1984. During his first parole hearing, he told the parole board that the notoriety he faced due to his crimes made him a victim, stating, "For a victim outside, it's a one-time or 1 hour or 1 minute affair, but for the person who's caught, it's forever." At the same hearing, Mosley claimed to have never intended to kill Genovese, and that he considered the murder to be a mugging because people do kill people when they mug them sometimes. The board denied his request for parole. He returned for a parole hearing on the 13th of March 2008, the 44th anniversary of Genovese's murder. He continued to show little remorse for Genovese's murder, and parole was again denied. Genovese's brother Vincent was unaware of the 2008 hearing until he was contacted by reporters for the New York Daily News. He's reportedly never recovered from his sister's murder. "This brings back what happened to her," Vincent said. "The whole family remembers." Mosley was denied parole an 18th time in November 2015 and died in prison on the 28th of March 2016 at the age of 81. He had served 52 years, making him one of the longest-serving inmates in the New York State prison system. The murder didn't receive much immediate media attention. It took a remark from the New York City Police Commissioner Michael J. Murphy to New York Times Metropolitan Editor Abe Rosenthal over lunch. Rosenthal later quoted Murphy as saying, "That Queen story is one for the books," to motivate the Times into publishing an investigative report. The article, written by Martin Gansberg and published 2 weeks after the murder, claimed 38 witnesses saw the murder, but an error reduced the number of witnesses by 1 in the headline. 37 who saw murder didn't call the police. It has been quoted and reproduced since 1964 with a corrected headline of 38 who saw murder didn't call the police. The public view of the story crystallised around the quote from the article by an unidentified neighbour who saw part of the attack but deliberated before finally getting another neighbour to call the police, saying, "I didn't want to get involved." Many then saw the story of Genovese's murder as emblematic of the callousness or apathy of life in big cities, and New York in particular. Science fiction author and cultural provocateur Harlan Ellison stated that 38 people watched Genovese get knifed to death in a New York street. His June 1988 article in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, later reprinted in his book Harlan Ellison's Watching, referred to the murder as witnessed by 38 neighbours, not one of whom made the slightest effort to save her, to scream at the killer, or even to call the police. He cited reports he claimed to have read that one man, viewing the murder from his third-floor apartment window, stated later that he rushed to turn up his radio so he wouldn't hear the woman's screams. Public reaction to the murders happening in the neighbourhood supposedly didn't change. According to a Times article dated the 27th of December 1974, 10 years after Genovese's murder, 25-year-old Sandra Zahler was beaten to death early Christmas morning in an apartment within a building that overlooked the site of Genovese's attack. Neighbours again said that they heard screams and fierce struggles, but did nothing. In an interview on NPR on the 3rd of March 2014, Kevin Cook, author of Kitty Genovese, The Murder, The Bystanders, The Crime That Changed America, said, "2 decades after the murder, the Chicago Tribune began an article titled Justice in the Wrong Hands by saying, Harold Tekucian, writing in Psychology Today, stated that Psychologist Frances Cherry has suggested that interpretation of the murder as an issue of bystander intervention is incomplete. She's pointed to additional research, such as that of Borowski and Shortland, demonstrating that people, especially at that time, were unlikely to intervene if they believed the man was attacking his wife or girlfriend. She'd suggested that the issue might have been better understood in terms of male-female power relations. The apparent lack of reaction by numerous neighbours purported to have watched the scene or to have heard Genovese's cries for help, although erroneously reported, prompted research into diffusion of responsibility and the bystander effect. Social psychologist John M. Darley and Bibbs Lante stated this line of research showing that, contrary to common expectations, larger numbers of bystanders decrease the likelihood that someone will step forward to help a victim. The reasons include the fact that the onlookers see that others aren't helping either. The onlookers believe that they will know better how to help, and the onlookers feel uncertain about helping while others are watching. The Genovese case thus became a classic feature of social psychology textbooks in the US and in the UK. In September 2007, American psychologists published an examination of the factual basis of the coverage of the Genovese murder in psychology textbooks. The three authors concluded that the story was more parable than fact, largely because of inaccurate newspaper coverage at the time of the incident. According to authors, despite this absence of evidence, the story continues to inhabit our introductory social psychology textbooks, and thus the minds of future social psychologists. A survey of 10 leading undergraduate psychology textbooks found the Genovese case in all 10 of them, with 8 textbooks suggesting that witnesses watched from their windows as Genovese was murdered, and 2 textbooks stating that some or most of the witnesses heard but could not see the attack. More recent investigations have questioned the original version of events. A 2004 article in the Times by Jim Rassenberger, published on the 40th anniversary of Genovese's murder, raised numerous questions about the claims of the original Times article. A 2007 study continued in 2014 found many of the purported facts about the murder to be unfounded, stating that there was no evidence for the presence of 38 witnesses, or that witnesses observed the murder, or that witnesses remained inactive. After Mosley's death in March 2016, the Times called their second story flawed, stating, "Because of the layout of the apartment building and the fact that the attacks took place in different locations, no witnesses saw the entire sequence of events. Investigation by police and prosecutors showed that approximately a dozen individuals had heard or seen portions of the attack, though none saw or were aware of the entire incident. Only one witness, Joseph Fink, was aware that Genovese was stabbed in the first attack, and only Carl Ross was aware of it in the second attack. Many were entirely unaware that an assault or homicide had taken place. Some thought what they saw or heard was a domestic quarrel, a drunken brawl, or a group of friends leaving the bar when Mosley first approached Genovese. After the initial attack punctured her lungs, leading to her eventual death from asphyxiation, it is unlikely that Genovese was able to scream at any volume." A 2015 documentary titled The Witness, featuring Genovese's brother William, discovered that other crime reporters knew of many problems with the story even in 1964. Immediately after the story broke, WNBC police reporter Danny Meehan discovered many inconsistencies in the original Times article, asking Gansberg why his article failed to reveal that witnesses didn't feel that the murder was happening. Gansberg replied, "It would have ruined the story." Not wishing to jeopardize his career by attacking a powerful figure by Rosenthal, Meehan kept his findings a secret and passed his notes to a fellow WNBC reporter, Gabe Pressman. As a journalism instructor, Pressman taught a course in which some of his students called Rosenthal and confronted him with the evidence. Rosenthal was irate that his editorial decisions were being questioned by journalism students and angrily berated Pressman in a phone call. On the 12th of October 2016, The Times appended an editor's note to the online version of its 1964 article stating that later reporting by The Times and others has called into question significant elements of this account. New York radio station WNYC, looking back in 2014, reported on how an iconic murder helped create the 911 system. A confirming PBS report wrote how papers and media outlets ran with the story. They also added nearly a dozen books, and when it came to film, mentioned James Solomon's film The Witness more than once. The report's The Genesis of 911 section noted that Up until the late 1960s, there was no centralised number for people to call in a case of an emergency. The story of the witnesses who did nothing is taught in every introduction to psychology textbook in the United States and Britain, and in many other countries, and has been made popularly known through television programmes and books and songs. It also now appears that the Kitty Genovese investigation and story was linked to false confessions in other cases. WNYC, PBS, and the New York Times look back article reference in particular one film, The Witness, and have noted the cumulative impact of the murder to the development of the 911 system. A Perry Mason episode, The Case of the Silent Six, 21st November 1964, portrays the brutal beating of a young woman whose screams for help are ignored by the 6 residents of a small apartment building. The get involved quote is spoken once by Paul Drake and paraphrased by several other characters. An American television movie, Death Scream 1974, starring Raul Julia, was based on the murder. The Law & Order episode Remand 1996 is loosely based on the Genovese case, as is the Law & Order SVU episode 41 Witnesses 2015. In the Season 1 Law & Order episode The Violence of Summer 1991, Detective Logan remarks, "It's the post-Kitty Genovese era. Nobody wants to look. They think they'll get involved," when lamenting the lack of witnesses to a rape. History's Mysteries episode 15.2 Silent Witnesses, The Kitty Genovese Murder 2006, on the History Channel is a documentary of the murder. The film 36 Témoins 2012, 38 Witnesses, directed by Lucas Bavarois, is based on Didier Decon's 2009 novel about the case and reset in Le Havre, France. Season 2, Episode 1 of the Investigation Discovery Channel's A Crime to Remember series, 38 Witnesses 2014, is about the Genovese murder. The 2015 film The Witness re-examines the murder with interviews of both Genovese's and her killers' families. The 2016 film 37 is a fictional account of the night Genovese was murdered. Season 5, Episode 7 of Girls, 2016, Hello Kitty, follows the characters as they navigate through an interactive theatrical version of Genovese's murder. Genovese's murder inspired Harlan Ellison's short story The Whimper of Whipped Dogs, first published in Bad Moon Rising, an anthology of political forebodings, 1973. In his book The Tipping Point 2000, Malcolm Gladwell refers to the case and the bystander effect as evidence of contextual cues for human responses. Ryan David Jan's novel Good Neighbours 2009 is based on the murder. In Twisted Confessions, the true story behind the Kitty Genovese and Barbara Kralik murder trials, 2013, Charles Scholar, the lead prosecutor from the Genovese murder trial, recalls the events and mass attention surrounding the crime. Kitty Genovese, a true account of a public murder and its private consequences, 2014, written by Catherine Pellinero, is based on the case. In the book, No One Helped, Kitty Genovese, New York City and the Myth of Urban Apathy, 2016, by Marcia M. Gallo, won the category of the LGBT nonfiction at the Lambda Literary Awards. Genovese's murder inspired folk singer Phil Oakes to write the song Outside of a Small Circle of Friends, released on the album Pleasures of the Harbour 1967 and a single. This song relates 5 different situations that should demand action on the part of the narrator. One of them, a woman outside being stabbed, but in each case the narrator concludes, "I'm sure it wouldn't interest anybody outside of a small circle of friends." Following the killing of Meredith Hunter at the Element Free concert in 1969, Kassan put out a 4-hour telephone call-in program to discuss the event. A woman who called in gave details about the violent behaviour of the Hells Angels at the show and said that people didn't want to stop them because we were all in terror of them. At the concert, she tried to speak up against the violence, but she was warned to be quiet by the people around her for fear of being beaten. In this response, Kassan Scoop Niska mentioned the bystander effect and the Genovese story. The crime-inspired singer Ruby Lynn Rayner from the Ruby and the Rednecks to write the song Kitty, originally released on the album From the Wrong Side of Town 2004, also released on the album Live Again at CBGB's. Korean indie rock band Nell wrote the song Dear Genovese for their album Newton's Apple in 2014, based by these events. English composer Will Todd's music theatre work, The Screams of Kitty Genovese 1999, is based on the murder. The Spanish theatre company Grok Theatre produced a theatrical piece titled Genovese, based on the Kitty Genovese case. This production won the Max Award, equivalent to the Tony Awards in Spain, and was directed by Miguel Ferrando Roche. Playwright-actor Lulu Lolo wrote and performed the show 38 Witnessed Her Death, I Witnessed Her Love, The Lonely Secret of Mary Ann Zielonko, Kitty Genovese story at the New York International Fringe Festival. Thanks for watching the video. I really hope you enjoyed. What are your thoughts and opinions about this case? Let me know in the comments.